I'm Keisha Simmons, President of Louisiana School Counselor Association.
Hi, my name is Lauren McInnes. I'm a student at Cato Magna High School, and I am on the council of our school's GSA, which is also known as SAGA. It stands for Sexuality and Gender Alliance, and I'm just here to talk.
Hi everyone, Spencer Kuiper, proud LGBTQ educator and 2019 Louisiana State Teacher of the Year.
Hi, my name is Mallory Sanders, and I am a proud mom, ally, and educator.
Hi, my name is Dylan Terrell. I'm a non-binary bisexual high school student and an ally of the LGBTQA community.
Hi, my name is Marissa Brown. I'm a drama teacher and I sponsor the high school GSA.
Hi, I'm Guy Robinson. I've worked with LGBTQAI youth groups for probably more than 30 years. I'm the former president, one of the former presidents of PACE Louisiana, also the charter or founding coordinator for PACE, our young adult social support group. In fact, I encourage you to access the information at the end of this presentation if you have someone that would be interested in participating with PACE. We are here today to have a conversation with teachers, educators, professionals, parents, and students about the current climate in our local high schools. We're going to talk about what we can do as parents, teachers, etc., to help improve the climate for our students that identify as LGBTQAI, because we know that the primary focus for education for our students to be in school is to learn, and when they are expending a lot of their energy to stay safe, both physically and emotionally, then they're not putting everything they can into that learning experience. So we want to improve that situation. We want to make sure that they feel comfortable, that it's a trusting environment, it's a conducive environment. So our conversation will lead toward that. We're going to ask questions, come up with answers, and we're hopefully going to offer you, the individual watching this, some pointers and some information on how you can create a safer space, be that trusted adult or whatever it might be, so that we have a better environment for our students for their learning experience. What is your current experience in schools right now? What would you describe as the current climate toward LGBTQAI young adults?
As a parent of a student who's LGBTQ+, I have noticed that there seems to be extra stress placed on students where they almost feel like they're living two separate lives. There's an area where they feel comfortable with their friends or perhaps their family or certain teachers, things like that. Then there's this whole other area where they have a lot of anxiety, they're really fearful, they're not sure if they can wholly be themselves. And I think that takes a really huge toll, not only on their mental and emotional health, but it also on their education and what's going on, around them and their social, everything social, things like that.
Me next.
Mm-hmm.
Continuing off of what my mom said, I, as a LGBTQ student, find that it's a very similar thing where you can feel comfortable with fellow students or friends or even, in my case, family that make you feel comfortable, make you feel like you can be who you are, but it's also very easy for faculty, teachers, administrators, anyone really, grandparents who are older especially, that you don't feel like you can be comfortable with, and you're not sure how they'll feel about how you identify or who you're romantically interested in, and it can make it hard to live two separate lives where you're constantly having to watch how you act or how you say it around certain people.
I think that's one of the points too that we need to make. Students aren't sure who they can confide in, and so that unknowing, and that's one thing I've noticed working with LGBTQAI youth, is that uncertainty there. Then they don't know what the reaction will be until they actually do say something. So you have that fear element until they are comfortable enough to say something. And in the place of, I'll say faculty, particularly since we're talking about the school environment, if they do know that someone appears to be more accepting or more comfortable, then they're more likely to say something along those lines.
Well, I do think for sure that there is some opportunity for schools to learn more, for some opportunity to become more educated about being inclusive. But I will say that more and more, the language is starting to surface. Teachers are reaching out, administrators are reaching out, school counselors are reaching out, and for the school climates, I do believe that educators rely heavily on school counselors to be the gatekeeper, if you will, of that information and those tools and resources. So the more we can do productions like this, right, and get those education materials out to schools, to school counselors particularly, then I think we will start to see the climate change more and more. But there is some opportunity for sure.
I think from that standpoint, as you mentioned, faculty and administrators understand, and they're more likely to trust the counselor, knowing the counselor's background.
Right, sure.
And so there's some concern about how do we handle the situation, or what language do we use, and so they'll go to the counselor to get that that support, that backup. You know, this is what we would like to do, so how do we do it? From my standpoint, we have seen more individual teachers who have stepped forward and want to gain that additional education, and they want to do something, and they understand the importance of it. And in some cases, they themselves are reluctant, or they're not sure how the powers that be, or whatever you want to call administration or anyone higher up, how they may handle it. So I think the counselors offer that safe space to talk, just like with anything else, where you can get that additional information.
I am an educator, and I teach at a really unique school where we have a really wonderful, inclusive student body. And we, this year, is our first year, have implemented a Gay Straight Alliance that we have called Saga. We asked that the teachers, the classroom teachers, asked for pronouns at the beginning of the year. We also implemented a program this year. The students found a program that would send us free "You Are Welcome Here" stickers. And so we offered those to teachers that would like to post that in their classrooms. And I think that has made a really large difference, especially, you know, coming in and seeing that on a board or a bulletin board every day and reminding them that they are welcome. But I've also taught in schools where that is not necessarily the case. And I do understand that, like, coming forward and having to be in that classroom every day and not sure whether or not your teacher accepts you for who you are is a really hard place to be. And so we've got to take care of, you know, like the comfort and safety of our students before we can really expect them to learn at a high level.
I'm a student. This is my teacher. Also, the co-president of Saga. I've grown up in like elementary school and middle school where it wasn't that accepted to be who you were. And I remember coming out in 7th grade and it wasn't that accepted, and I got a little bullied. And shifting from to a high school where that was so accepted, that was so giving, was such a nice shift. And as a fellow student, it's my job to make sure that my classmates are heard and seen, and make sure that they also feel safe in the classroom as well as I do. And I think that it's important that even if I'm just a student and I'm sitting in the same exact desk that you are, that I'm also sticking up for my fellow man. And I think that it's really important that we stick up for other people, and I'm really glad that I have such a loving household which I can do that, and I want to make sure that students who don't also feel the same way that I do when I'm at school.
One of the things that I've noticed over the past several years is just an awareness that educators have in terms of some of the data that we're seeing with LGBTQIA youth. I think that 10, 15 years ago we had a large educator population that didn't really understand the plight of a youth that identify that way, and the true struggle that we oftentimes find with our youth. that ultimately results in some pretty serious consequences. So I think that what we've seen is just a larger awareness of students and their role in that. It's up to them to build that classroom climate that is supportive of those students. Mm-hmm. And because of that, you're seeing more and more educators step up to the plate and building those spaces, being very intentional with their practices in that, and not shying away or shrugging away the responsibility that educators have to build a space for every single one of their students.
I think that's one thing, I'm glad that you brought that up, that we've seen is over the past few years, we've seen that the data shows actually through GLSEN, which was a major source that I use and that we use. The data shows that it is improving. We've had kind of a leveling off in the past 2 years. The current school climate survey is going on right now, so that data will be available later. But we have seen that big improvement, and I think the more and more that we see teachers and administrators and other professionals within the education realm that access that data and learn from it, that they see that it does make a big difference. Because what we do have, I mean, we all know the primary reason someone is in school is to learn. So we want them to put their effort and energy into that learning process and not into defense mechanisms, either for physical safety or mental safety. And I think the mental safety is just as important, if not in some cases more so, than the physical safety, because they carry that mental with them everywhere and at home. One thing that the next question I'd like to ask is, we do know that there is a higher instance of absenteeism in LGBTQAI students because they don't feel safe. Now, looking at the data nationally and for Louisiana specifically, it's interesting to see that even though Louisiana has quote unquote, according to the sources, not good numbers, they're still better than the national average, which is surprising because historically southern states do have much lower acceptance levels and recording levels. So that's a plus, and I'm glad to see that they're a little bit higher. But personally, particularly the students involved here, do you know of people that have mentioned that they miss school particularly because they do not feel safe, and parents, of course, and counselors involved, but everyone. Have you experienced that? Have you seen that? And what do you think along those lines?
Well, Dylan actually had some issues at school with that, where he was, they were calling me every day saying, I have a stomach ache, I don't feel well, I need you to come get me. And when we got a counselor involved, we found out that they were having some bullying issues, and it was really affecting their learning. And we had to look at some alternate ways for them to get their education and to do some things because we just weren't finding that there was a safe space for them. And it took a little while to actually pull that out of them and figure out what was going on, though. It really did. And then as an educator, I see that a lot of my students who are LGBTQ+, they do very often, they know that my classroom is a safe space, but they do often come to me, this happened to me, can I please go see the counselor, I need to call my mom. Several of the students have had to be out due to mental health issues, and I watch this happen to them on the, regularly, weekly.
It's something that we see with students, anytime that there's a source of stress, they're going to shrug away from spaces that they feel unsafe in. And one of the things that we see a lot as educators, in my 10 years as a middle school educator, when students are probably just beginning to become themselves or feel comfortable with who they are, even at certain points of the day, they'll choose to, not really choose to, but involuntarily have reactions to certain individuals, typically adults and or students that they encounter throughout the day, that causes chronic absenteeism. I often think that too, parents are often more aware now of the resources that are out there that we maybe didn't see 20 years ago. There are options in place now, especially with COVID. We have virtual learning options, and parents are a little bit more aware of the resources that they have available at their disposal for their child. And so typically parents will seek out those opportunities to make sure that the safety of their child is their top priority.
I will say to that point, excessive absenteeism is certainly a warning sign for school counselors. That's one of the first things we look at. Sometimes it's not wanting to come to school altogether. Sometimes it's missing a particular class. And so we will definitely, excessive absenteeism is one of the top warning signs that school counselors will look at to reach out and try to identify what's the cause. And so to that point, for sure, absenteeism is one of those warning signs that we do track. And it does tend to give us a lot of information about the child. When we start meeting with the parents and meeting with the child, we get a lot of information, as to why, they're skipping school or skipping certain classes, so that's definitely a warning sign for us.
I've definitely experienced it in a way. I remember not wanting to go to gym class because these guys in there were just so rude, and they would say really weird things, and and I mean, it's not like I haven't experienced that before, but like not wanting to go to a certain class because I was being called like just the most random names is such a weird experience. I mean, I remember in middle school having people say, "Oh, I can't be friends with you anymore because you're out." And that was such a odd experience because I've always been this person who's just been kind of friends with everybody, who has just been talking with everybody, and having people shy away from you because of your sexuality does take a toll on your mental health. I've had a lot of friends who have been called names and very offensive names in the most random of places, and like whether it be a fast food drive-through line or it's the school bathroom, it happens more often than we see because teachers and counselors and parents can't see what goes on in the places they aren't. And I think that's really important to talk about, is that so much goes on that we don't know. Like you said earlier, you didn't know what was going on, and you were wondering, why is my child not coming to school so often? And it's because of things that we're too afraid to speak up about. And I think it's important that we start looking into those reasons, like absentees and why are they not coming to this class, why are they skipping so much, and get down to the real issue with it. And it's just plain bullying.
It's more common, like you said, it's not often caught, and it's not often something that's seen or brought up, how people will all of a sudden, like, because of whether they believe the same as their parents or grandparents, or even just because of how their parents believe, it can be hard to still remain friends with somebody who's of the LGBTQ community, or it can be difficult to want to continue to go to school and everything when you feel like you can't trust teachers and you can't trust friends and people you thought that you could feel safe around. All of a sudden, you can't.
One of the things you mentioned, one of the questions I have, it's reported that a lot of students do avoid gender-segregated areas because of that, that you have increased bullying or increased negativity. What are your thoughts on that score?
They're the same like you. They're your friends, and then seeing them be so sad that they have to fit into this box all day, every day, makes you so sad because you just want to like be able to say it's okay, you're not wrong, you're not a bad person, you're not horrible for being who you are. And they're constantly pushed into that mold, which can also affect your mental health. And I don't know, it just sucks and it hurts to see. And sometimes it's not an easy issue to fix. Sometimes there's not one solution, but I definitely feel like there can be some progress made with it.
Well, I tell you, as a school counselor, that teaching acceptance and equality at that middle school, high school age is a challenge across the board, right? I think we all know that. Now we do have a more focus on social emotional learning, in our schools. We have more curriculum, we have more tools. But to that point, American School Counselor Association and Louisiana School Counselor Association as well, in our position statement, we do recognize that students who are part of the LGBTQ community are considered a special group, and within those special groups, we know how special groups can be marginalized. We know the effects of that behavior, and to that point, there are steps being taken to make sure that a focus is on those students and creating a safe space. For example, supporting the GSA groups within the school. Our position statement speaks specifically to that, and so, and you can actually go on to Louisiana School Council Association or the American School Council Association and read that position statement in depth, but it does speak specifically to helping students in the LGBTQ community to transition into school successfully, okay? And so I just wanted to point that part out because we do have a position on that, and
Thank
we
you very
stand
much.
very firm,
That's
okay?
very
We do,
encouraging
we
to
do.
hear. So I appreciate that. Here's one statistic. It's reported that almost 1/5 of students who identify as LGBTQAI have either switched schools or considered switching schools due to negativity in their environment. I would say that also transitioning to homeschooling would classify there as well.
That is something that I've seen and experienced. I taught in a different parish, and I was itinerant, so I taught at just a lot of schools. And so I had students all across the parish, and I had a handful of students who either changed high schools, like left middle school and went to a different high school, or dropped out, or did a homeschooling option, or the like virtual school option, like in the pre-COVID days, because of the environment that they were in. Thankfully, those students also had family support, and were able to make that kind of transition. However, I also saw students that didn't have that family support and were stuck in the school that they weren't welcome in. Mm-hmm. And that's a really tough thing to watch. So I had a student who I started teaching when they were in elementary school, and continued to teach them through high school, and they struggled in high school remarkably. They struggled academically, they struggled socially, they struggled in a way that they would not have had there been a room other than mine, and I was only there once a week. Mm-hmm. So a room other than mine where they could be the person that they are. And also if they'd had the family support to get them the counseling services that they probably needed. And so that's, I think I'm rambling a lot, but it's incredibly difficult. And I have also on the other side of that experienced at the school that I teach at now, some of those very students that I'm talking about came to this high school to get out of the places that they are. So progress is being made, and places do exist, and there are places, and that was before they'd had a GSA on campus. Mm-hmm. Having an inclusive student body is really one of the primary factors I think as an educator, as the way to keep students safe.
Right. In an ideal world, that would be every school.
Right.
And I wish
in
that
an
were the
ideal
case.
world that would be
and
every
that's what
school.
we're working toward, hopefully. Would anyone else like to comment?
Teaching in a middle school environment is, really where students are starting to kind of figure out who they are, what's going on, and as you can imagine, there is a high percentage of bullying and things like that in middle school. So I actually have one of the "You Are Welcome Here" stickers on my board, and seeing the kids on the first day of school come in, and they notice it right away. They know, their face light up when they see it, like Miss Sanders' room is a safe space. For me, that was really kind of reclaiming what happened with Dylan, having to transition to homeschool because they did not feel safe in their environment, and they did not feel supported or like they could be themselves. They were struggling to make friends. Major anxiety. I mean, pulling out their hair, things like that. Had never had issues before, but we go into this to this school, to this middle school, and we're having all these issues. And for us, there wasn't going to be another option, unfortunately. We do have a few schools in the parish that I do feel are incredibly inclusive, but a majority of them are really trying to get to that point. So after switching Dylan to homeschool and watching them thrive, and now they do dual enrollment at a local college where there's a GSA, and they get to really be this person. So I try to reclaim that within my own classroom. And I find that a lot of our faculty is on board with that. They also, I ordered stickers for them, things like that. But there are those spaces that still, I mean, kids will come and say, do I have to go to this class? Can I please stay in your class? Or things like that. And it breaks my heart. And likewise, I will have parents even reach out to me and say, you know, my son or daughter or my child told me that you have this sticker on your board, and I'm not comfortable with them being encouraged to be this way. And so you know that child is going home to a place where they don't feel like and you see it. You see the grades start to slip, you see the fighting, you see the behavior, you see the skipping.
The manifestation.
And and you really do, you see it right there, and it's heartbreaking to not be able to offer more for them. But I do agree that our school counselors are really on top of it when it comes to that. And I do that recommendation, and they get them in there, and they work with them and the parents. But I do wish there were more options for students struggling with that.
I think one of the things that we oftentimes find as well is when we have school systems that prioritize building those spaces, we retain our educators who value creating those spaces. One of the things that I think that I can speak to is shifting from a system that was less supportive to one that is incredibly supportive of those youth, and we share that experience. Yes, and educators who prioritize that safety of students at every level will seek out working for institutions or school systems that often share those same values, and oftentimes those are your educators who do see increased levels of student achievement, decreased levels of absenteeism, all of the indicators that are the red flags of LGBTQI youth. We see educators seeking to work for institutions or systems that value that same walk.
I will say one of the things that we do encourage in schools to both students and teachers, we do encourage students to find a trusted adult. Not all, let me say this, some spaces are going to seem safer than others, as we just outlined or identified. But we do encourage students to find a trusted adult on campus. Find somebody. It can be the cafeteria lady, it can be the janitor, it can be your art teacher. Find some adult who you absolutely trust that you can go and talk to and who can help you and advocate for you and just be a listening ear. And the other side, or the other point to that, we encourage educators to become trusted adults. We also encourage parents to become trusted adults. There are curriculums out there where we teach parents how to become trusted adults. And basically, simply put, it's just listening to your child or listening to children with a non-judgmental ear, know the resources that are available, and be able to direct them. So you don't have to be the expert. Just know where to direct them. And so I think to that point, if we can encourage children to find a trusted adult, encourage adults in schools, no matter your position, you can be a trusted adult, right? Any contact adult can be a trusted adult. We may develop more safe spaces. So that's an opportunity to develop more safe spaces for students, okay?
I feel really grateful to go to a school that is so inclusive and have so many teachers that we can go to. I remember in middle school having teachers who I thought I could go to when I couldn't, and that was a really big problem because it's this adult that you know, that you trust, and then you just lose all of that once you tell them one thing about yourself. But going to a high school where my teachers are so inclusive and there for you is very important. I know many of my friends, and me included, we go to our teachers to help us with these things. We feel trusted and we feel safe. And I think that's so important to have in schools. And coming from a line of educators in my family, I know how it is, and I know how teaching is, and I know how hard of work it is, and they're doing so much for us. And I think it is so great and important that they create such a safe space for us. And having good teachers is the backbone of everything. And it's really nice to have those people.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Like was brought up by everybody else, middle school is when a lot of people start finding themselves and start having those issues and everything like that. And that's, for me personally, the feelings of anxiety and depression and things like that that come with feeling like you can't belong whenever you thought you did and everything like that can make a dramatic difference. I mean, not only on your life in general, but your education, which is what the school system is for. And so having gone from feeling like that and being in a place where I didn't feel safe to being homeschooled, where I'm lucky enough to have a parent that is understanding of that, and then going back into a more public setting where I can tell the difference, where people are more accepting and understanding. Like you said, my local college has a GSA, and just the difference it makes for myself and from other people I've talked to, friends I have, it makes a dramatic difference just having, whether it be parents, teachers, or fellow students, that you feel like you can be yourself around and that you don't feel like you have to try to hide who you are.
That's a good point. I'm going to touch on one thing that's mentioned by a couple of you. Some of the information that GLSEN has is interesting because they mention that if there is a GSA that starts in the middle school level, and I'll make a point there, because we talk about how difficult it is to get GSAs even in the high school level. But if they start in the middle school level, the schools that have those, they have shown a marked decrease in bullying across the board, not just LGBTQAI students, but everyone, because they begin at that initial discovery stage, and for people to realize that, you know, we're all different. Whether it be you know, orientation or just backgrounds, whatever it might be, but that education and that understanding and that level of acceptance reduces the stress level across the board, not just for the students who identify as LGBTQAI. So we do tag all the information from GLSEN in the presentation so that people have access to that. And I strongly, strongly encourage anyone that is watching this presentation to go online, access that, and read the data for yourself, and so that you can apply. It's great resources for educators, it's great resources for parents, it's great resources for students starting GSAs.
That information was one of the biggest parts of us successfully starting the GSA, is being able to access and show that data of the reductions in bullying and the reductions in absenteeism and suicide rates.
Suicide being
and
key.
So, like that, it is valuable data, and it is publicly available.
We understand, again, from the data that 98% of students hear negative comments such as "that's so gay" used in a negative way, or "no homo." They hear comments against people who identify as transgender or non-binary, that they're not masculine or feminine enough, whatever that definition may be, and things like that. How much, both from a teacher administrator standpoint and from a student standpoint, how much have you experienced that? Have you seen it? And then after this, I'm going to ask you, and what did you feel comfortable doing about it?
Teaching middle school, unfortunately, a lot of the bullying and the rhetoric that we hear are things like "that's so gay" or people using just really inappropriate language. So I made the decision at the beginning of the year that I was just going to come in with, and just let them know that that does not stand in my classroom. So with the "You Are Welcome Here" flag, it opened up a conversation, students raising their hand, "Are you LGBTQ? What's going on with you? Tell us about this flag on your board," and talk to us about it. And I just, very openly told them that I have a child that is non-binary and that I do not tolerate hate speech in my classroom. And I said that is something I take very seriously. Not all of us think the same, not all of us come from the same background, but that is my personal, that's where the boundary is in my classroom. And now when new students come into my classroom, if they say something like that, every kid is like, we don't talk like that in Miss Sanders' class. That's not the language we use here. And I really feel like some teachers might hesitate to take a stand and really speak out against that, but I don't think it's because it comes necessarily from a negative place, but it comes from a place of not feeling comfortable with the language, not having the education about the LGBTQ plus community, or not having direct alignment with it, to be able to speak openly and say, I'm not okay with this, and here's why you shouldn't speak this way. And so I really think that by opening those doors and getting more training and counselors and giving teachers those tools to have those language, you can equip them with that courage to stand in their classroom and say, hey, we don't allow this in our classroom.
I'll say for school counselors, educators, teaching acceptance that is the work, and that's the work, with all kids, teaching acceptance of all students. Where it becomes more of a focus with the LGBTQ community, once again, is the lack of knowledge. Now, school counselors, as I stated before, that we do have a position statement that speaks directly to supporting students of the LGBTQ community, and part of that is advocacy. So making sure that we advocate particularly for LGBTQ students. And with that comes learning the language. You have to get involved in the community to learn the language, to know what's offensive and what's not offensive. So the same due diligence that we give in advocating for any other marginalized groups of students, we have to give that same degree of dedication to our LGBTQ students to make sure that we're advocating, and we're advocating effectively.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that we've noticed since maybe when we were kids is the language in a lot of those marginalized populations has decreased, the slurs and the jargon to be used that promotes bias or discrimination. And so I think this is just the newest front of that same conversation. And we've seen the needle shift in terms of educators who are comfortable having those conversations amongst each other, amongst families and the community. And so I think that we'll continue to see that, but there's so much work to be done in this space because it also addresses a comfort, right? And so kids are coming to us seeking that comfort, which I think we haven't really gotten to as a culture or society ourselves. And so we'll continue to see that happen. I think that as we start looking internally in terms of like teacher support, and so what teachers need in order to make that happen, it becomes a conversation of visibility as well and representation. As someone who grew up gay in the South, like many people do, seeing that representation or visibility in a school was never a thing for me until I got to college. And for my students, I understood how critical it was to have that visibility. And so when we're talking about the language that kids use amongst each other, putting a face to the marginalized populations that those slurs or that jargon is being used against is absolutely critical. And so I think that was one of the things as an educator that was most important to me, was giving a face to some of the hate language or the hate speech that was happening in the school. And that changed the conversation, right? That changed the conversation of what teachers were willing to look past or to accept as just commonplace. Like, well, one piece of hate speech is okay, but other words or other more severe offenses is worth more attention. And so one of those things that I saw shift in my school was the attention to not using that language, especially around me, but also I was able to have conversations with my colleagues and coworkers about how critical it was for them to also be advocates for not really downplaying, but really addressing head-on the use of all forms of hate speech, not just certain ones that were more offensive.
But when you hear that hate speech with the students, and we have data to show that sometimes the students hear the hate speech from the teachers and administrators, I'm going to ask you, I would assume yourself would be comfortable stepping up and saying something, but how much do you think your peers are comfortable stepping up and putting a stop to that speech and saying something? What have you noticed?
Unfortunately, there are a handful of coworkers and other parents outside of my educator position that do speak up, that have something to say, that want to stand up. But I do see there's some hesitation within the school system. People are afraid for their jobs. People are afraid to get those parent calls. People are afraid, I do believe. And I think, again, it comes down to educating individuals and providing them with resources so that they know they don't have to be afraid. When you walk around, covered in tattoos, you get used to having certain conversations with individuals, so I shy away from it less. But other people who might be more quiet, more timid, older individuals, veteran teachers who maybe haven't always had experience with this, or maybe they're just now getting comfortable with it themselves, they have a very hard time speaking up against it. And those of us who are more vocal just keep trying to encourage them and bridge that gap and give them tools and resources to do that. But we can't do it all on our own. No. So, but I do think that there's a lack. And I also noticed the hesitancy in the students. If someone says something to one of the students and, I'll speak up, maybe another student, but you see the other students sort of shy away. They don't want to be in the spotlight. They don't want to become part of that conversation. They don't want to be associated with that, whether that's their friend or they just know it's wrong. You can see the hesitancy, like it's visible, like eyes down, and you
Body
see it
language.
happen. Yes.
So one of the things that has actually happened to me this year as the sponsor of the GSA is I've had a couple of those conversations about other teachers dealing with those sorts of things in their classrooms. And so one of the things that I started doing a really long time ago, much prior to GSA, was I use in conversations with parents, the only pronoun that I use is we. It brings parents into the conversation. So we are having trouble with this. We had a really great day today, and that not only does that avoid having to use a pronoun in front of a parent or make a student uncomfortable, it also brings some really the parent gets more involved in that piece of the conversation.
It's that psychological connection.
Yeah, and so I do the same thing in my classroom, and that's what I've encouraged anyone who's asked me this year especially to do, is so we don't say those things. We should treat people in a way that we want to be treated, and so you build that sort of community in a way that you shouldn't do that doesn't always do. So that's been my solution.
One of the things I've experienced is not so much of the fear of speaking up with educators, is knowing how to and what to say. I mean, I've had educators either call or leave me a note, and they'll say, I witnessed this, and I'm going to do something. I just don't know what to do. I'm going to say something, or I need to say something. And so, of course, we talk it through. But what I would say to, teenager, adult, educator, it doesn't matter. When you're faced with students making derogatory comments of any kind, one thing you do want to do and make sure that you do is maintain the self-esteem of the child who may be charged with making that comment. So you want to do that for sure, and then turn it into a teachable moment. Avoid fussing, but definitely turn it into a teachable moment and explain to them, point out what they said, explain to them the detriment of what was said, and give them an alternative way to make their point so that they aren't harmful in the future. But definitely maintain the self-esteem so the child, will leave still feeling whole and know how to respond the next time, right? So that's what I would recommend, and when faced with students when you're having to speak up. And in all things, if you don't know, go find somebody. Don't avoid speaking up, but definitely research it, Google it, talk to somebody, find your counselor if you're on campus, to figure out how do I address this. And that's the most important thing. Don't leave it unaddressed.
And to address it where you maintain your own safety.
Yes, maintain your safety, absolutely.
Let's speak a little bit more and take it to a more serious level. We know that we hear the negative comments and the negative phrases, but that oftentimes escalates into physical altercations. And so we use harassment that can be verbal or physical harassment, which also leads into pushing and shoving is classified under that category. When it becomes more violent, then it goes into assault, and we've witnessed cases of physical assault towards students who appeared as anything other, or who were, self-identified as being part of the LGBTQ community. How much have you seen that, if any? Now, personally, I've heard some stories, but I'm asking your input. And then, in your opinion, and your professional opinion, and then your just gut instinct opinion, what can we do to improve that situation so that we don't have that, more so than what we've already discussed with the verbal, because we know that leads to the next. So if we can stop it at the verbal stage, that's great. But in the event that it becomes a physical alteration, what do you think we can do?
Obviously, there are policies in place for fighting, right? So the goal is to get ahead of it, right, before it gets to that point. And one proven preventive method is, as I stated before, reporting, finding a trusted adult. It may not be an administrator. It can be a teacher. It can be a librarian, just some adult on campus who you're comfortable talking to. But reporting that type of behavior, if you feel threatened, if you feel, and I know the word bully is used very lightly now in the schools, and so sometimes, it's used out of context, but that's okay. If the child is feeling threatened or feeling even uncomfortable, with another student, report it. Encourage students to report it. And I have to say again, finding that trusted adult. It could be a teacher, a counselor, somebody on campus to report, but encouraging students to report as soon as possible to keep it from escalating is going to be the key to preventing that from happening. So I'm going to, rest on prevention in that regard. I realize it gets physical, but I am definitely going to position myself with prevention and keeping it from getting physical, okay?
As an educator, we are bound to certain processes, right? And so one of the things that we have to do is to take things seriously and really understanding that situations with bullying when it is an aggressor versus an LGBTQ student needs to be taken seriously. And I know that goes without saying. We would all love to say that is commonplace, but it oftentimes isn't, because going back to the hate speech, being called gay or being harassed for being gay might be seen as a lesser offense than some others. And when we have populations of students who are LGBTQ, but specifically the trans community, which is statistically proven to be victims of aggressive assaults anyway, those patterns of behavior don't just develop overnight with adults. They develop when students are in school, when spaces accept aggressive behavior against LGBTQ and specifically the trans community. And so really just keeping an aware eye out for those types of instances. We would all love to say that we don't tolerate that kind of behavior and that we're aware of it and we take all issues of bullying seriously. But if that were the case, we probably wouldn't see a lot of the national statistics against our community.
That's true, and also you have to know what's happening, and a lot of it does happen behind the scenes, and let's face it, students are very good at hiding stuff from teachers and administrators.
I think that sometimes violence can be disguised in a way, especially in sports teams or communities like that, because they will see it as friendly banter when they don't realize what they're doing, like calling negative names or pushing around or doing certain things to their teammates who might be part of the community. And
Boys will be boys.
boys will be boys,
Yes.
stuff like that. And it's often seen as they're just playing around.
Or
And-
it's that age.
Yeah, it's that age. They're just having fun. They're just round eyed and whatever. And it's not seen as an actual problem. And I think sometimes that's what happens. Like as a woman who has been told boys will be boys and things like that, it's often looked different upon when it's told that towards boys. And I think that as a friend to people, you can sort of just talk to them and make them understand from your point of view why it's not okay. Because most times, or not most times, but sometimes kids won't listen to adults. They'll be like, oh, like this isn't real, it doesn't matter, it's whatever. But when you hear it from someone who's close to you, when you hear it from your fellow peers, when you hear it from someone who's on your level, they understand more why it's not okay. And you can tell them like, hey, my friend told me that you were doing this, they don't really appreciate that. And you're not like telling them they're a bad person, you're just kind of explaining that it isn't okay. And sometimes what people need is just to be explained. They just need a simple talk. They need hey, is there a reason that you're doing this? Did they do something to you? Is there something going on at home? Just a simple, hey, what's going on? And I think that's really important.
And I think from your standpoint there too, if it's coming from a peer, it's usually more accepted than if it's coming from a position of authority. And again, I think we can look at the fact that having GSAs on campus where you get that peer-to-peer interaction and giving the students the support materials and the education and the language to use and everything else so they learn how to diffuse those tense situations with a fellow student. I think that helps.
Yeah, sometimes what a student needs isn't to talk to an adult. I mean, they do,
Right.
But sometimes what they need is a friend. Sometimes outcasts will bully others because they're projecting their own insecurities, and they will do it in a way that can be harmful. In the mornings on Wednesdays, Saga, our GSA, will just have students be able to come in and talk to the council, and just if they're having any problems, if they just want to talk, they can come in there, and it's helped. It's had people, freshmen who don't feel welcome, freshmen who have been bullied just for being who they are. Having that older person that's not exactly an authority, but just maybe like an older sibling type.
Or the trusted friend,
Yes,
as you mentioned.
the trusted friend.
adult.
The trusted friend. It helps more ways than we can understand. When I was younger, coming into a high school of people I didn't know, it felt nice to have people who related to me. And that helps tremendously. And I think that what we really need to enforce is GSAs and how strong they are and how much they can really help a student.
As a student myself, I was never a part of or saw physical altercations, but you see the aftermath and you see the unease upon both, especially the LGBTQ community, but the school in general, whenever they know that being different can go so far so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with a lot like with backpedaling a little bit with the use of gay as an insult, and I saw it even young in elementary school. And a lot of it just comes from, that's why GSAs and things like that are so important, is because a lot of it comes from ignorance. Hearing it, a lot of the times, hearing it from an authority or anyone they view as an authority, a teacher, a parent, can feel like you're being scolded instead of being encouraged or just having a normal conversation where you're being explained why you shouldn't do these things rather than actually being scolded for how you're feeling. And a lot of it comes from just ignorance of not understanding how these people are feeling because you're not a part of that community or things of that sort. And that's why things like GSAs, having a trusted friend, or in a lot of cases, a teacher who puts their foot down and explains that we can't say these things, we can't act this way because of how it's making other people feel, can make a big difference.
we need to work on restorative justice instead of simply punitive actions. What wound up happening is the bully and the person who was bullied wound up with the same punishment for being in a fight. And so that's one of the things that I try really hard to do is that sort of restorative, where counselors step in instead of necessarily administrators or the discipline sort of person. And so, because if you just send them home for 3 days, there's not something that changes when you come back. So is that something that you could speak on?
Absolutely. We do encourage administrators to shift toward being less punitive, right, and more corrective, in their actions. And so that too, there is some opportunity for growth. Some administrators are much better at it than others, as you've identified, but that is definitely a position of school counselors and school counselor associations to encourage more corrective action as opposed to punitive actions, because we do know that punishments, we know, what that type of action, the results, what it typically yield, right? And we also know that suspensions, data shows us that suspensions are not effective. They are ineffective. And so encouraging corrective action, versus punitive is definitely a position of ours. So there is work to do there as well. All right.
I think one additional consideration that we have to make too is the support that we often have to provide to LGBTQ families or families with LGBTQ children. Because a lot of times what we consider to be just run-of-the-mill altercations or situations that we encounter as school professionals are much deeper and impact a student on a lot of different levels. If we take into consideration the fact that only a quarter of our LGBTQ students are going home to parents who are supportive or families who are supportive of them, that altercation at school that may have been a result of their sexual or gender orientation status could have some severe repercussions at home. And so looking through the lens of not only providing that school level support, but potentially even pulling in our counselors and offering that family support as well may be critical for our LGBTQ students.
Leading into that, some of the data unfortunately shows that LGBTQAI students are sometimes punished more severely for the action, and the victim is punished more than the perpetrator. I'm not sure how much you've seen that, but how can you speak onto that subject? Because we've seen that disproportionate disciplinary practices if the individual identified as LGBTQ, such as comments from administrators and teachers saying, well, if you wouldn't act so gay, you wouldn't bring it upon yourself. Well, if you would behave more like quote-unquote normal students, it wouldn't happen. You brought it on yourself, things like that. I know that's a really uncomfortable way to put it, but what could you speak on to that subject?
I can't really speak on it as far as like the physical altercations, but just as far as maybe students getting in trouble for PDA or things like that in class or in school. I mean, even just this last year, I've had to have some uncomfortable conversations with admin about my students who are LGBTQ+ getting in trouble for holding their partner's hand or things like that when, there's other students walking down the hallways, like hugging, like, little cheek smooches and stuff, but it's like, they were, some students got sent home for this PDA when other students are just walking around doing it.
This, and we've seen that with the disproportionate, the unequal policies.
Yes, and that level of shame that those students have after that, like you can't even hold, your partner's hand walking down the hallway, like very innocent and sweet, but everyone else can. And then they're also getting this taste of, oh no, is this what my future looks like? Like this this is what this is going to look like, and you start to see the fear and the anxiety start.
Yeah, I do want to speak to that just a little bit, because it does fall under equality, right? And I think you said that earlier. And so it is important for students, if policies are in place, we want to always encourage students to follow school policy. You know, even if you see, I mean, we are held to that standard even as adults. We have to follow the law. Even when we see others breaking the law, we have to follow it. So if policies are in place, follow the policy. And to that same token, we want to encourage administrators to make sure that policies are equally applied. So we want to make sure policies are equally applied, and then that students are treated equally when policies are broken. So that part is very important. So knowing your school policies, whatever your school policy is with PDA, you know, that's important, right? And you do want to make sure. So that could be something that the GSA advocates for, right? You can go to schedule a meeting with your principals, talk to your principals about some concerns where you see policies are not being equally applied. You're right, and then see what type of corrective actions can be put in place. But always go with solutions. So don't just identify the problem. When you go with solutions on how the administrators can help you. Okay? All right.
I think that one of the things that, going off of your response too, is the tone of how we handle situations. And so while policies might be equal across the board, how they're approached and the tone of which they are approached, whether they come off homophobic or transphobic in nature, students are going to pick up on. And I think that for our LGBTQ youth, they're a bit more hypersensitive in some instances, because they do know that holding hands out in public is contrary to a general social norm. And especially when you're younger and you're living that, it does feel to be a bit more ostracizing in a sense, and so you're already doing that to yourself. Making sure that as an educational leader or administrator, that we understand that as we handle these situations with our youth, that we do so through a tone of inclusivity, and we explain thoroughly that, you know, this is something that, you know, despite who you are, who you were doing it with, this will be handled the exact way. And really listen when those situations happen to our students. While I have to make a call to your parent, is there anything you would like for me to know? Or is there anything that I need to keep in mind? A small little question like that would give an educator or educational leader invaluable insight into how that conversation goes, and potentially may even save the life of one of our students.
And I think that's a key point where you say potentially save the life, because unfortunately, there have been instances where, for whatever reason, a teacher either purposely or inadvertently outed a student to their parent with detrimental consequences, and we have to keep that in mind. Where statistically we show that schools that have a GSA, that have those conversations where you are able to bring up the topics and mention, you know, equal treatment, where you're able to answer the questions that the students have as they're learning and as they're discovering, where you give them that safe space to inhabit and to relax and get a break from, you know, all the rest of the negative energy the world throws at you. You know, statistically, we've seen that students just perform better and do better when there is a GSA or similar organization or group within the school system. So let's talk a bit of how we can encourage that to occur, other than, you know, just this presentation to provide that facts and information. But what do you think we can do as individuals? How can we encourage that so that we get more of those organizations within the school systems to help the students, which is really what we're after in the long run, is to help students?
I think that one of the reasons that we were able to successfully found this GSA, I think I said this earlier, is the abundance of data. And so when we talk to administrators, when we talk to school board officials, when we talk to people who may push back, those are all people who look at data on the daily. And so like focusing on the demonstrable benefits was one of the things that made the creation, the founding of this particular organization reasonably seamless in the ways that it can be. The thing that we are all here to do as educators, as administrators, as counselors, is to take care of our students. And so when it was met pretty well, when we came forward with data that says this is a better place, a way that we can better serve and better care for and better educate our students, that was really the thing that paved the path well for us.
And I will say, add on there, and we're going to have the resources at the end of the presentation, and the links is GLSEN does provide that information, not only the reports where you can go in and look at that specific information for both nationally, for the state of Louisiana. You can pick Texas, Arkansas, whoever may be listening to this, you can pick your state. But they also have the resources underneath. How do you start a GSA?
Yes,
It's
those were
student-led.
very.
Right.
They were very accessible. They were easy to wrap your head around. It's not a bunch of like fluffy jargon. The students could dive into that data. It was presented well, and so it really lent itself to being very useful.
And it's not asking for anything different than any other student organization for any other deal, whether it's the Glee Club or the History Society or whatever it might be. It's no different from that.
Every student deserves to find the village that they belong in.
Exactly.
I think to that point too, when we start talking about the villages that our students are coming from, is dispelling the myth that some schools don't have gay kids. I hear that a lot from individuals who are extremely resistant to the idea of having a GSA on campus, because obviously if you have a GSA on campus, you will get gay kids, or kids will turn gay because you have a GSA on your campus. All of these things are absolutely ridiculous. Every single campus has students who are falling in several of those categories. And depending on your school population, there are many of those children out there who may be just really awesome at hiding it because they understand that in order to be safe in that village, they have to conform to a certain way. GSAs don't cause disconformity. They promote inclusivity and are great for students and faculty also, because we have to also acknowledge the fact that our faculty can also be members of the GSA as well, that those organizations focus on promoting inclusivity through the lens of social equity and data to promote spaces that are safe for everyone, for all marginalized communities and majority communities as well.
And it's also, we say GSA, Gay Straight Alliance, whatever you want to call it. They're also available for students who may have a family member that identifies. It gives them a place to go to, a place to get resources. Right, your best friend, anyone. I know for us, particularly with Pacey, the youth group that Pace started, our big thing at the beginning of the meeting, we don't ask for labels, we don't ask for identifiers. We're not going to ask you why you think you fit in here. It's just we're here for you. If you want to come through the door, you're here. And I think that's the same thing with most GSAs. They don't ask you to provide any information you don't want to provide, but if you feel the resources there and you want to partake of that resource, then you walk through the door.
Right. I'd like to also point out, too, in the GSA clubs that we've seen, it's not just for students who are part of the LGBTQ community. It's also students who want to support an ally, right?
Exactly.
So you don't necessarily have to identify in the LGBTQ community to be part of GSA.
No.
You could just be one of those students who love the movement, want to support, and so it's for allies as well, and the same for teachers. So I do believe that the GSA club is a great way for educators and administrators to get in there, get plugged in, learn the language, learn how to advocate and support the students, go to the meeting. Just go, hang out. And that way you can definitely become more educated on your
And
campuses.
let me throw into there too, the parents where appropriate. Because if you have a question about what's going, just go look. Go see for yourself, and those questions will go away.
Yeah, it's in our bylaws that we filed, that we will not ask for your orientation or gender identity. I will ask for your pronouns so that I call you the right thing. But we also don't have a membership roster, and we chose specifically not to have membership dues. So we've done some fundraising and whatnot, but so we've put those things in place so that if you want to come to a meeting just to see what's happening, nobody has to, like, you don't have to put your name on the paper, and you don't have to, like, I don't know, there's no Kool-Aid. So you can just come in, or if your friend is presenting one day and you want to come be there specifically to see one thing, there's
To
no
support.
membership requirement about those things.
I think what I want to speak to for just a moment is the power of the idea of GSA on a campus. For someone who grew up in an extremely rural community, the idea of attending a meeting where anyone may even glean the idea that I was gay at that age would have just been terrifying to me. But knowing the fact that there was a GSA on campus, that there was a place that existed when I was ready to go, and it could have been, I wouldn't have been ready in school. But just knowing that there was a place that was there, ready to accept me at a time that I was ready, would have just been a game changer for me, self-esteem wise, safety wise, knowing that there was, if something happened, if I got outed, or one of my best friends said something, or I was having issues with one of the teachers, that there was some place that existed that was going to have my best interests at heart. That would have been an incredible and valuable resource for me as a student.
And that's one of the data points that they mentioned. Now, with the GLSEN School Climate Survey, it's anonymous. Students can go in online and do it now. So they would have students that filled that out. And they mentioned whether they chose to participate or not, the fact that the GSA was on campus was a comforting thought and made them, as you said, made them aware that if they were ready, it was there, and that alone removes some of the anxiety and some of the pressure.
Yeah, I'd like to also dispel a myth that's associated with GSA to parents, because I still get a number of calls, from parents about the LGBT community organizing on campus. The club is not to teach homosexuality. The club does not exist to teach or recruit homosexuality or students who are homosexual, right? So the club is there to educate, and as we just pointed out, it's there to teach inclusiveness. So it is a place where you can go to get properly educated on the LGBTQ community if you so desire. But that myth that it's there to teach homosexuality or to recruit, I do want to dispel that myth as a counselor.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I think that there's a certain stigma around GSA clubs to certain students. They sometimes identify GSA with people who like certain things that isn't exactly normal and popular media. So, and I've seen that happen in my school a lot. Even from fellow people of the community, they've said they don't want to go to Saga because of weird people. And I think one of the greatest things about this club is that we just don't care. And we accept you for who you are, what you want to wear, what your hair color is, like, it doesn't matter. And I think that there's a stigma that only weird people go here, and that's wrong. It doesn't matter if you're weird or not, like, nobody cares.
It's the anime.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, I don't like furries. Nobody cares. This club is for fun. This club is to educate. This club is to have people who support you and love you. And people will think, oh, I don't want to go there because blah, 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 blah. No, we don't do that. We educate. We have many amazing presentations by our club members that educates people on topics they didn't know about. We have times where we just talk to each other and make new friends. It's this big stigma around this club that we're either trying to convert people to homosexuality or that we're just weird people, when it's not. I think what needs to happen is we just normalize it. We're just as normal, like you said, about like a glee club or the drama club. We're just here. And I think that that stigma really needs to just die. It just needs to go away because it's just a club, and I think that that's one of the main problems that people have with it is this big myth or stigma around it when a lot of it's not true.
And I'd like to speak a little bit about so one of the things that I sort of heard is that once you start this club and you have flags up in your room or this, that, or the other students won't feel comfortable there. And I would like to think that that's not true. In my experience, it is not. I have a very large classroom. I'm the drama teacher, and so there's a bunch of space. So we have lots of things that happen in there. And sometimes I haven't taken down whatever flag the children put up that day for the saga meeting. And so, there were, during daylight savings time, we had a couple of Muslim students who needed a space to pray, and I have fourth period planning where lunches happen. And so they used my room for prayers, and the pride flag was up. And we had an FCA meeting in my room because they needed the space. And we had, various things happen in that same space, and I feel like everyone really is welcome, and I do feel like they all, that is the perception. So another myth that I'd like to dispel is that once you start this, once you're the gay teacher, nobody likes you anymore. Other people don't want to be there, and I don't think that has been the case in my experience.
Okay. While we're still on the positive, I'd like us to do just the brief statement, whatever each one of you, what do you think still that we can do to encourage safe spaces? And then after you make your statement, we're going to go into another topic, but I don't want to bring the energy down yet. So let's just go around kind of just that positive, what can we do? In your elevator plug, if you want to call it that, you know what I mean, that 30-second, if I could tell you something, this is what I would tell you.
Okay. I believe that one of the things that we can do to promote inclusive spaces for our students is really just educate our leaders of the benefit of having those spaces and the benefits that it has for all students. Our LGBTQ students are some of our most fragile individuals who need protecting, but building those spaces out not only benefits those individuals, but all individuals on campuses. So committing to building those spaces as leaders and encouraging our other educators or our constituents to see the value in those spaces is, I think, one of the things that we can do.
I think that we have to remember that safe spaces are built on trust. Children need to be able to trust us as educators, as their parents. They need to be able to trust their peers. They need to be able to trust the people who are there that most of their lives they are told these are who you need to go to when there's issues. I think that those safe spaces quickly become unsafe when children do not feel like they can trust others. And when we don't trust the children, when we don't listen to what they're saying, when we don't trust that when they come to us and they say, this is what's happening to me, this is what I'm feeling, this is who I am, and we just dismiss it, then we're not giving them the chance to be safe. We're not creating those safe spaces.
Well, all I wanted to say was I feel like the best way to making them better environment and things that people can do better is just simply education. I mean, that's the point of a school environment, but the LGBTQ community is one of the most persecuted, but also one of the most misunderstood groups, and I feel like whether it be from teachers or fellow peers or through GSA, a push for making people understand that this is a normal thing and that you're not any different from anybody else by being queer or by having like friends or knowing people that are queer. It doesn't make you any different than anybody else.
I would say get educated. Get educated on how to advocate. Get educated on being able to identify the warning signs when children are in trouble. And get educated on how to become a trusted adult so that you can create a safe space and be that safe space for children when they are in trouble.
I think that creating a safe space as a student is educating your friends. And sometimes we're afraid to educate our friends because we're afraid that they won't be friends with us anymore. We're afraid that they'll be mad at us. But I think the most important thing to create a safe space in your environment is to simply just talk to them. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, it's just talking and creating this relationship between you and your friend where you're like, hey, I want to talk to you about this thing, it's been bothering me, or it's been bothering another student. That's really important. And being able to tell your friends when you're uncomfortable, being able to talk to fellow peers about certain topics is really important, and just educating them. And they might not know what's wrong. They might not know what they're doing is not okay, you know? So it's really just important to just talk and be open and express your feelings in a way that your friends will understand, and then your friends will talk to their friends like that, and it'll create a tighter knit community like that.
And I think the thing that I have to say is the way that I think we can move forward and build those safe spaces is creating a space where you're allowed to be imperfect. One of the things that I do in my classroom frequently is if I overreact or if I say something that I shouldn't have to a student, I did that publicly and I apologize publicly. Mm-hmm. And so I think that one of the things that creates that safe space is not having to meet a standard that you can't. And so allowing people to be a whole three-dimensional human being all of the time, and the whole three-dimensional human being that they are all of the time is I think the thing that makes that space the safest.
Thank you very much. Now, because we need to address this, unfortunately. So we've heard in other states and in our own where they are trying to put legislation through of what they are, generally calling the Don't Say Gay bills, where they are stifling our ability to say what we need to say by limiting what people can talk about. Even to the point of if a student approaches a trusted adult and needing to talk about an issue, that they may not be able to talk about that issue. So I'm not really sure what a question would be here, but other than what do we think we can do if we are faced with that situation? What can we do after the fact? But what can we do before the fact? So obviously we can attend school board meetings. We can make our voices heard. We can attend as parents, as educators, as counselors. We can pay attention to what's going on. But in the event that everything that we try doesn't work and we have those policies and actions put into place, what do you think we can still do to support our youth that are very critical, the LGBTQAI youth? I know that's a tough question.
Mm-hmm. Very hard.
Well, hopefully, school will always be a place where students can go and share, what's happening with them, what's happening to them. And so to that point, focusing on the issue, teaching students how to communicate and focusing on the issue, what's happening to them. And maybe the language is not so centered around their sexual orientation as it is the discrimination they may be feeling or the inequality they may be feeling. Just teaching them how to adequately express how they're being impacted or their feelings, that's important. And that's a work in progress, working with middle school, high schoolers, just teaching them how to communicate effectively. If the language of sexual orientation is taken away from us, we can still, talk about how we're being mistreated, ways that we're being mistreated, terms that are being used that may be offensive. So teaching them to still report and talk to counselors or, like you said, that trusted adult is going to be very critical, even more critical if they're silenced into using certain terms.
And that's a key point for the educators too, that if they approach the issue from that standpoint, there's things that they can still say and things that they can still discuss. And we have that safe outlet of the school counselor, because as in any counselor environment, what occurs there is private conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. And hopefully, and I'd like to believe that all counselors were prefaced by saying that, what goes on in here stays in here. And so that's important for students to know. And so school counselors are only required to report if you threaten to harm yourself or someone else. But anything outside of that, you're safe, And so I'd like to think that the counselors are creating that relationship and safe space for students to come and talk to. And in many cases, when they come to us, they don't have the words. A part of our job is to sort through it all and give them the words. So then together as a team, we go and figure out how we solve it, But sometimes as school counselors, it really is to help them sort through the emotions, put it to terms. So now let's figure out what we need to do to fix this. So I will encourage students that whatever it is, it doesn't have to be pretty. We're used to looking at things that are not pretty, okay? Just come. We'll put it together. We'll listen and sort through your emotions and give you the terms you need and put it to terms and get to some solutions, okay?
Thank you.
I think my general concern about this recent flood of legislation around the Don't Say Gay issue is the fact that there's a perception around if we speak it, it will become someone's lived existence, and that is just not the case. I think that what this legislation aims to do is to reduce the ranks of the population of people who are the largest advocates for these students, and it's the teachers that they have. And we need to be increasing those individuals who are educated and aware of the issues that this group of students is going through. And so for me, as an educator, I would have my picture, and as I have in the past, a picture of my husband in my classroom, and that is a clear signal to most children who pick up on that, that I am gay. However, for other educators who are allies, who are even more critical than our LGBTQ teachers, because we need, for every one LGBTQ teacher that we need in a school, and we do need them because that's representation, but we need 5 more allies in their place to support the work that needs to be done. I think the legislation sets the stage to silence those individuals, and it's absolutely critical to take that fire of supporting students. If you can no longer legally do that in a place that you work, you must do it in the community that you live in. And there are several ways to do that. You can go to school board meetings, but if it's a state issue in terms of a state passed law and the legislator, then going to your legislators with data in hand that is readily available, and encourage them to reconsider and amend any legislation that is built to reduce the supports that we have with one of our most fragile populations of students.
Right. What I find most hypocritical about the entire thing is they step forward and claim we're doing this for the safety of the children when the data clearly shows it is detrimental. And it's mind-boggling.
And what we're going to see if that happens is that we are going to have to step up how educators and admin start to respond to students who are, we are going to see an increase in their anxiety and their depression and their self-harm, their distress, in general. And so we need to get people trained. We need to get us stepped up. And I don't mean just one of our PDs that we click through and we go, okay, we did this. No, We need someone there on site. We need to be prepared. Parents of these students need to be prepared, and maybe, if there's a way to even prepare the students themselves, like let teachers know, let teachers speak with the counselors so they know that this is a safe space to direct the children to, that there's certain things we can't say, but that if the counselor can, here's the steps, here's the action we will take.
And we are accustomed to being that middle person between educators and administrators, absolutely. And in most cases, we have just as many visits from teachers as we do our students. It just depends on what's going on. And this is a topic that certainly increased traffic from teachers into our offices, because they're struggling. The school counselors will always be an ally when it comes to equality and acceptance.
And we're putting more work on you, but we appreciate it.
Yeah, but that part, we got it. Yeah, we do. We own that.
So I think that in the same way that you talked earlier about following policies to a letter, I think that one of the things that I've sort of tossed around in my brain is making sure that I know that legislation inside out and backwards and upside down, so that I know that I can both protect myself and my students, and keep supporting the students in the same way that I do. And no problem, I can edit my language. I taught elementary school, and there is a sailor that lives inside of me. I can edit my language. So I 100% would encourage everyone to, make sure that you've read the entire bill. Make sure that you understand what is being discussed, because, we're educators and knowledge is power, and I can't talk to my legislators if I haven't read the thing that I'm talking about. And right now, the bulk of this is very broad, and it is very, it's really subjective. And so the ways that those things can get talked about, I can still sit and listen to my kids. I may have to refrain from saying anything, but I can still be the person that lets them come to my classroom when they have something going on. I can still be the person that compliments your green hair, or so even if I have to edit my language, I don't think that I'm going to have to edit the person that I am and the educator that I am. So.
And my lasting thought on this too is, and it kind of was inspired by your statement, protect yourself. And I know that there are educators out there that won't be able to turn that advocacy off, that won't be able to, I don't want to say obey, but respect this legislation. Don't leave yourself out there to the point where your credential is in jeopardy. We cannot afford to lose a quality educator over a piece of legislation that is so anti-student. And so in that sense, if you are in need of support as an educator and you don't know who to turn to, those national organizations that are pro-teacher, pro-student, are critical more than ever to be a part of. And if you find yourself in need of legislation, in need of representation, you need to put yourself in a situation where you can lean on those national organization partners for that resource. No one wants to be in a position to where they are in legal jeopardy or their teaching credential is in jeopardy over being pro-student. And to my knowledge, there are no national pro-student, pro-teacher organizations that are coming out in support of any of this legislation. And so align yourself with a national partner that will support you in case something happens.